This is the iPhone 15 Pro, and it might just be the greatest tool for filmmakers, photographers, and creators in general. I'm gonna show you a bunch of footage shot in 4K 10-bit ProRes Log. That's wild to say. I'm gonna give you my first impressions about the build, the hardware, and then we're gonna talk about the 7 lenses. Or is it 6? Or is it 3? Spoiler, if you think it's 3, you're wrong, and it's probably why you're wrong about the cameras. All right, let's first look at the footage. I don't know about you, but I kind of laugh when people say things like they don't care about technology, or that technology is somehow inherently bad. All the while, technology is going forwards, getting crazier and crazier, wilder by the day, and I'm capturing more and more of the big and small moments in my life. And I can't help but think what it's gonna be like to be 75 years old and looking back at all of these memories and moments and things that happened in my life. How much is that worth? All of that was shot on the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max with a little bit of assistance from an FPV drone on just a couple of those shots. I did not crash it, don't worry. And then I did use like an underwater case, mostly because I didn't want to sink one of these to the depths of the lake. And I gotta say, that's the first time I've edited any iPhone, any other phone footage and not felt like I'm editing phone footage. Does that make sense? Usually you're editing it like, it doesn't look quite that good and the color grading is a nightmare. This was the first time I didn't feel any of that. Maybe because it's log, maybe because it's ProRes, maybe because the cameras are just getting that good, or maybe all of the above, but wow. Okay, so we have the new titanium build, which right away just feels way lighter in the hand. Even this Pro Max just doesn't feel that heavy. I don't know if it's a combination of just it's lighter, but also these rounded edges just make it feel a little bit lighter and nicer in the hand. Smaller bezels on the screen, which is nice and noticeable. We have the new A17 Pro chip, and it's crazy fast. We have the new action button instead of the mute switch, which is really nice. You can customize this to things like, for example, the camera. And then we have USB-C. Yes, please. I just don't like to carry around a bunch of different cables, mostly because I end up forgetting one of them. By the way, with the USB-C, you can now record externally up to 4K 60 frames per second in ProRes, which is very interesting. I didn't get a chance to test it out yet though. But the biggest thing, of course, for you and for me is the 7 lenses. Or is it 6? Or is it 3? Okay, let's get this straight because I think there's going to be a lot of confusion around this whole thing. First off, the Pro Max gets a new 5x 120mm telephoto lens, which is actually my favorite telephoto camera I've ever used on a phone, and I'll explain why. Then Apple did some really interesting things, and I'm assuming this is because the chips are faster now that they can actually do it. But now we get 24 megapixels from that same 48 megapixel sensor instead of the 12 that we used to get. And the wide camera, you can now choose for it to be a 24mm, a 28mm, or a 35mm, and you still get that 2x also from that same wide camera. And here's where people, I think, are getting confused. They're saying things like, those don't count as focal lengths, they're just digital zooms. And I think what they're talking about is, we've all seen those lens tests where they test a bunch of different lenses and keep the same kind of framing, and the face goes from like that wide, exaggerated look to that flatter, more flattering look. And people are saying that this cannot do that. Or can it? Let's see. I took a whole bunch of different photos from different focal lengths, lenses, whatever you want to call them. There's the result. I even threw in some digital zooms on the ultra wide and on the 2x just to give us a whole bunch of different focal lengths. So what the heck is going on here? Well, actually, I think people are just confused about what lens compression is. And I still feel like I don't fully understand it. But that look, that changing face, has to do more with how close you are to the subject or how far you are to the subject than the actual like glass in the lens. So in this case, because you're not losing any quality going from that 24 to that 28 to that 35mm, it's essentially like you have an actual physical zoom lens that goes from 24 to 35. The electronic zoom in this case is essentially the same as a physical zoom lens. Think of it more like a full frame camera that has a crop super 35 mode and then another like micro 4/3 mode, all without losing any quality. And so when you change it into those different modes, you're getting a different focal length, even though the lens, like the physical lens on the camera, is the same. I think you're gonna probably hear quite a bit of people saying like it's just 3 lenses, it's not 7 or whatever. But I think that those people are actually mistaken in this case. And usually people would make a big distinction between digital zoom and an actual like physical zoom because the digital zoom would have a loss of quality. But in this case, Apple has figured out some magic to go from that 48 megapixel to 24 megapixels in 24, 30, 28, and 35 without losing quality. I think I need to do like a full video on this, testing like an actual physical zoom lens and then just the digital zoom, because this is really interesting and it's really hard for us to comprehend because it's kind of a new way of doing things. Now, the macro being counted as a lens or focal length, that to me is debatable. I feel like that's more of a feature of a lens. That's not really like a focal length. But if you're not a photographer or videographer, it kind of just illustrates better what this is capable of. So personally, I would call this a 6 focal length, 6 lens camera with the ability to also do macro. Also, the 48 megapixels on the wide is just so good. They're just getting so good at all this computational photography that it looks like a legit camera. 48 megapixels, there's so much detail. Also, from what we saw, the night mode colors have gotten so much better and just like more accurate. I didn't get a chance to test this. There's a lot I still want to try. Oh, and those 6 focal lengths are only for photo. For video, we still get the same 0.5, 1x, 2x, and 3x on the Pro and 5x on the Pro Max, which is a completely new telephoto. Apple's never done a telephoto zoom like this. And all in freaking log ProRes video. It's kind of interesting to even in DaVinci see on the color space transform like Apple log. I didn't think that that was something that I would see. The quality is unreal. The best by far for video that I've ever seen from a phone. I would love to see MKBHD do his like phone camera battle thing, but for video, because I just think that Apple is so far ahead of the game in terms of video on their smartphones. Now, of course, the file sizes are going to be massive. It's ProRes 422. So a lot of people aren't going to be filming in ProRes, which is I'm curious why they didn't give us ProRes LT as an option. I don't think it's really any difference in terms of like compute or anything like that. So yeah, Apple, I would love ProRes LT. I think I would probably use that all the time then if I had that as an option. Also, you can now zoom in on cinematic mode for video, which is very interesting. I think it just speaks to how fast this new chip is that they're able to do stuff like this. Stuff that I never thought I would get from this smartphone camera. Tiny, portable. I mean, I feel like a bit of a broken record every time a new iPhone comes out, but it is just wild how much you can do with just this tool. And probably the best update for photography is that now you no longer really have to take portrait mode photos. You just take a normal photo, and then afterwards you can choose to add portrait mode, that shallow depth of field, kind of like fake background blur, which actually looks pretty dang good nowadays. And I love this. I always hated kind of having to decide, like, should I take a normal photo or a portrait mode photo? And then I kind of do both. Now you just take a photo, and as long as this little like F symbol thing comes up, that means that you can then edit the photo and enable portrait mode afterwards. And you can even choose where the focus is. Now, of course, you're still battling like actual hardware focus. So like on the 5X, for example, if you take a picture of somebody, you're not gonna be able to just put the portrait mode on the background because that's actually naturally out of focus. But also that's kind of like a silly scenario. Who's gonna take a photo of like their friend and be like, actually, I want the focus to be on the random guy in the background. Speaking of the 5X, this is the first telephoto zoom camera lens, whatever you want to call it, that I actually like. Typically, I don't like the telephotos because a real telephoto zoom, the more you zoom in, the crazier the shallow depth of field gets, except on smartphones, there's no shallow depth of field. It looks so off and it just doesn't look good to me. But with Apple's tetraprism technology, they're actually able to get some pretty nice shallow depth of field on the 5X camera. Because there's like no space in here to actually have a zoom lens, they're just bouncing the light back and forth, essentially creating a longer lens without it actually sticking out like crazy. So yeah, I honestly thought that 5X was gonna be one of those features that they can just kind of like list off, like now we have 5X, and then it's kind of gimmicky and nobody uses it because it just doesn't look very good. But actually, this is the best telephoto I've ever used on a phone. All of these features and tools built in make this one of, if not the most powerful tool for filmmakers and photographers and creatives for the price. Like, what can you get for this price point that does all of these things, including, you know, like other utility for our lives, like internet and texting, phone calls, all that stuff, but also has all of these camera filmmaking capabilities. There's no tool like the iPhone 15 Pro. Okay, I gotta cut this here. There's so much more that I wanna talk about, so many more things that I wanna test out, but I have to edit this video and get this out. And I hope you guys liked the footage. I had a lot of fun editing this video just because the quality is so much nicer. It wasn't one of those like, oh, I wish I filmed this on like a legit camera. Okay, I'll see you guys later. Bye.